And there you go. Over to you, Phil.
Thank you, SUVIDH. Really appreciate it, mate. And I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. Okay. SUVIDH, have you got that on your screen, the RENTVESTOR?
It's not visible yet. I can see your desktop.
Okay.
Yeah, got it now.
Great. Yeah, my apologies. That's the slowness of the internet here, even though I'm on NBN. But we're working on that and we'll get a 5G connection shortly. Okay, so you're ready and you're recording?
Yeah, already done.
Okay, well, great. Everyone, welcome. And as always, I get excited to present this because one of my absolute passions is educating people on what is going on in the market. And I mentioned offline already today, we've seen two of the major networks on radio talk about the regional property opportunity. And in fact, a friend sent me a recording from Neil Mitchell, and he was talking about this exodus to regional Australia or regional Victoria for us as Melburnians predominantly. And I had a short guest opportunity on the ABC myself today. So that was this morning. So the RENTVESTOR, the future of investing. So what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to learn about the following. What is, in fact, a RENTVESTOR and why I believe it's gathering momentum? Who can we consider to be the types of people that would be classified as a RENTVESTOR? And what are the RENTVESTORs actually looking for? I'm going to, for those that haven't been on these workshops previously, I'm actually going to talk about the Holy Grail of property investing, in fact, what it is. And if you have been on these workshops previously, I'll reinforce it. Now, traditionally, when we talk about property investing, we talk about capital growth versus rental yield. And people tend to think, well, does it have to be one or the other? I'm going to give you some examples of win-win-win, and actually how you can have what I believe is the Holy Grail of property investing. So straight off the bat, well, what is a RENTVESTOR? So a RENTVESTOR is someone that owns a property or aspires to own a property, which will be an investment rather than the one they're currently living in. Typically, we find with RENTVESTORs, they don't want to be tied down by a large mortgage. So who are RENTVESTORs? Well, if you look at the definition, they're typically young adults known as millennials, and they are people born in the years between 1981 to 1996, and they're aged in around about 25 to 37. But I'm actually going to, for the purposes of my own observations, I'm going to broaden that definition. So I'm actually going to include it as being downsizers. I'm a person that would be classified within this definition. I'm 53, and I believe many people in my if you like, my demographic are seeking lifestyle and cash flow. Many of those people have got the kids are either finished university, and some of the time their kids have moved out of home and they're themselves looking to downsize. Another area, and again, I tick the box there as well. I'm also a divorcee. I was married for a very long time, well, 22 and a half years. And for me as well, I consider myself a RENTVESTOR. I live in Canterbury, here in Melbourne. I live in a lovely suburb, very leafy, quite English. I didn't want to have a large mortgage like I used to have. And so we're looking at ways to rebuild income, have assets, and also rebuild our confidence. Another area in relation to divorcees, or rather RENTVESTORs, are actually widows and widowers who are stepping up as the breadwinner or want to put their money to work. It's interesting that I do have conversations, people get referred to me, that these are people that gone through a life-changing event. Perhaps they've been left money, perhaps they've gone through a situation where the husband's passed away or the wife passed away if she was the major breadwinner, and now they're looking at, well, hang on, how can I actually put my money to work? So why do I think rent vesting is gathering momentum? You only have to look at what's happened with prices in the last 25 years. Median values have risen an unbelievable 412%, or some $460,000 over the last 25 years. And if you look at this chart here that I've put together, these are the median house prices across capital cities as at December 2019. And the source in this example was Domain House Price Report. Sydney 1.142, Melbourne median house price 901, Brisbane 577, Adelaide 542, Perth 537, and Hobart 530,000. So let's dive into a case study, shall we? If you were to purchase a house in Sydney or in Melbourne, let's say for $1 million, you'd have indicative loan repayments around about $4,000 a month. Now, the thing about that is you need a deposit, if you're going to borrow 90% of that, of around $100,000. However, if you want to avoid lender's mortgage insurance, you'd have a deposit, say, of some $200,000. Well, interestingly, I don't know about you, but a lot of people don't necessarily have access to a $100,000 deposit. And more, and I think COVID is actually, again, reinforcing that people just want a desire for a work-life balance, and they just don't want the stress of a large mortgage. And I think really what we're seeing is with the uncertainty around employment, people who perhaps are contractors, their contracts aren't being renewed, people are being asked to work lesser hours, self-employment employed people in many industries are finding that there's just not enough work around and people are actually earning less money. So the people don't want the stress of a big mortgage. Another thing is that why I believe rent vesting is gathering momentum is that the millennials have seen what their parents did. They moved out to the suburb for many years and they much prefer renting. It's all about flexibility and being able to move around rather than being tied down by the ball and chain of a mortgage. So the thing is, for rentvestors, their focus, I believe, is on affordability. And as a result of affordability, what that means is a much, much smaller deposit. Affordable properties, I believe, for rentvestors means that being able to more easily buy more properties in the future. Now, if we were to focus on, say, traditional home ownership, house value, let's say at $1 million, and again, as I said on that chart before, loan repayments at $4,000 a month, well, what sort of cash surplus have you got to live in? Well, sure, you've got a beautiful home, but it's an asset that's not producing for you any income. So the rent vesting model, in this example, let's say you rented a house that's worth $1 million. Instead, you might rent that at, say, $2,500 a month. That same $4,000 a month that you were using to repay a mortgage on $1 million property, you could potentially put that to work and use that surplus to invest. The key about that is you've got a solution that now is producing income. And so here's an example. That $1,500, if you tipped it into 3 different buckets, so I've got the $1,500 cash surplus, and you could put $200 of the $1,500 into 3 different properties, an additional $300, so $500 a month. That potentially could be servicing for you 3 investment properties. They might all be in Victoria, or you might decide to diversify and look at different states, particularly if you have concerns around issues like land tax. So here's an example. And SUVIDH, I'm going to actually ask you to do a little bit of work for me, my friend, if you don't mind. So let's look at an example. This is what I would call a typical rentvestor friendly property. Let's say we bought a house for $260,000. The government charges, I've used a stamp duty calculator for Victoria. So the property cost you $277,000. SUVIDH, if we were to borrow 90%, say, on $234,000, I've worked out the loan repayments at 3%, which was about $1,000 a month. What sort of rates are we looking at the moment?
Roughly around the 2.49, 2.5 sort of rate.
Okay, and so what would that look like if you'd have borrowed $234,000 principal and interest over 30 years? What sort of repayment are we looking at? I've allowed for 3% of $1,000 a month.
My estimate would be maybe $930, $940 a month.
Okay, well, even if it's a $940, so that's $60 less per month. I've allowed for utilities. You've always got to pay your rates and maintenance of, say, I put aside $60 a week. So in this example, we had loan repayments of $1,000, but SUVIDH, you've said $930, $940. Let's call it $940, being conservative. So we've got about $1,250 a month going out. That's going out of our bank. If the rent's $340 a week, less our property management fees, then we end up with about $1,360 a month. So in this example, not including SUVIDH's numbers at $940, we had $110 a month as a cash surplus. SUVIDH's just kindly told us maybe another $940, so that means it's another $60. So maybe about $170 a month cash positive. Now, what I would always teach as a strategy is to de-risk. That extra, say, $60 or $170 a month, pay it off the loan, and you're building equity constantly into the property. So rentvestors are looking for what I think is perfectly suited for them, is what I call the Holy Grail of property investing. So smart rentvestors are looking for three things, three different wins: affordability, so a low price point, but not necessarily the cheapest property. And typically for us, we think properties in the range of $150,000 to $250,000 are very achievable across Australia. High rental yield starting from 6%, that's the second win. And the third win is growth. Hey, who doesn't want capital growth? And the importance is with capital growth, you look at strong local growing economies and low vacancy rates. And low vacancy rates are usually a really good clue. So two things are a clue to prices likely to rise, and that is that you've got low vacancy rates and rents increasing. And you only have to go back to Sydney in 2013. After 10 years of actual no growth, the smart investors were following the data and seeing that the vacancy rates were falling and that rents were starting to rise. And lo and behold, the market went on its big boom run. So on the quest for the Holy Grail, well, why don't we look at some more data, because I'm a great lover of data. So let's think about some locations and let's see if these examples tick all three boxes, which was affordability, strong rental yield, and capital growth. So what I did is I got my team to have a look at suburbs around New South Wales, Vic being Melbourne, and Queensland. What were the cheapest suburbs? So if I start out with Sydney, Tregear, the median price was $434,734. The rental return in the last 12 months was 4.8%, but it had negative capital growth. So it actually dropped by just over 16%. If we go in our own backyard to Melton, the median price was $389,180. Rental return wasn't too bad, 4.8, but it also dropped in value over the last 12 months, down 6.1%. If we go to Queensland, Bundampa, the cheapest property up there, or the median price, $330,000, a better rental return at 5.6, but it also did not have capital growth. It dropped as well. So therefore, the cheapest suburbs, my point that I'm illustrating here is it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to lead to the win-win-win, or what we would call the Holy Grail of investing for a rentvestor. But I wanted to demonstrate some examples where I think you can, in fact, have it all. And there are many examples of that. So if we look in our own backyard here in Victoria, Portland is an example of that. And Portland, in fact, the median house price in Portland was $255,000. Rental return over 6.1. Capital growth for the last 12 months, 11.91%. Maui, not the drink, of course. Moe, 210,000 median price, rental return 6.4, capital growth 12%. Cranbrook in Queensland, 260,000 median price, rental return 6.3, capital growth 9%. And Bridgewater in Tassie, we don't often talk a lot about Tassie, 245,000, rental return 7%, capital growth 10%. So there's examples where you can in fact have it all. And so that said, we're talking again for rentvestors about buying low price properties between 150,000 and 250,000. So again, reinforcing that they're producing rental yields over 6% in regional towns that have had strong local economies. And in fact, Victoria, in the last 12 months, according to CoreLogic, have had 61 towns across our beautiful state had capital growth over 10%. But the mainstream media don't tend to report that, do they? They would rather talk about doom or boom. So it's interesting, isn't it? So real case studies, rentvesting properties that tick all the boxes using what I would say is our unique strategy, and that is renovation, negotiation, and where possible, off market. And so in regard to that, I'm just going to mute someone here. Someone's just chatting away. Here's an example of a property. And in fact, those that have been on perhaps a couple of the other workshops would know this is actually one of my own properties in Shepparton that I bought for $257,500. I did some cosmetic renos. I spent $12,886 on it. It owed me $286,000, $351. Sorry, just someone speaking in the background. Just need to mute their phone. So the property initially, when I bought it, was rented close to the hospital, actually about 600 metres from the Golden Valley Hospital. And there's a lot of renovations going on at the hospital. I was renting it to a doctor when I bought it for $295 a week. We actually said, look, we're going to do some upgrades. Doctor didn't want to pay the additional rent, and that was fine. So as a result of the cosmetic renovation that I've done, my rent went up to $340 a week, which after all my expenses, I'm talking valuations, all my cosmetic renovations, title insurance, etc. And this is, I just thought I'd show you, it's not a sexy looking house. I call it meat and three veg, in other words, but it had good real estate bones. So you can see from the images here, just a very, very basic house, just a basic house, but in a good area, bought strategically. And this is what we did with the house, just really tidied it up, freshened it up with another paint job internally, off-white, got rid of that old gas heater, and just put in some succulents in the garden. We ripped out the soil, or rather my gardeners did, put in fresh soil. Succulents, why? Because they're very low maintenance. We want the tenant to enjoy the house, not to be thinking, oh, I've got to go and mow the lawn and do the gardens. And so with that, in fact, they pay my gardener every 3 weeks to come along and mow it, put in a nice new split system, bought it next door to a park, and as the crow flies, about 600 metres from the hospital. And so this is part of what I would call buying a property in terms of being quite strategic about how we buy. So one of the things I think is really important is about negotiating a good deal. I bought this particular house in Albury for a client. In fact, I went up to Albury the day before the Premier of New South Wales, Ms. Palaszczuk, closed the border. I drove up at the last minute, stayed overnight, looked at a bunch of properties, because I felt it ticked the boxes as a really good area for future growth. The house was originally listed at $269,000, and we didn't buy it initially. About 3 weeks later, we put in some offers and worked it way down to $254,750, and the rent's $310 a week, producing us a return of 6.3%. One of the things I talked about for rentvesting is here's a property that we bought in Shepparton. This was one that was off market. So because of the relationships over time that we've developed with local agents, they ring us now and they let us know they don't have to do as much work, which is good for them and good for us and good for the vendor. So this house was listed, it was going to be listed. Wasn't actually on the market yet, between 209 to 219,000. Just a very basic 3-bedroom house. Where the trees are here to the right was another park. And the idea for the owners was they wanted to stay on. They actually want to have a lifestyle property for their 3 sons and move out of town. So in the meantime, they've decided to stay on, rent it off my client rather, at $285 a week. We in fact negotiated to buy it at $210, and the gross return for my client is 7.81%. Now, SUVIDH, you're around money every day. I don't know what you think of that return, but I think it's pretty amazing when you've got Macquarie Bank sending out flyers to to financial planners saying, oh, wow, if you invest with us, you'll get a return of 0.5%.
Absolutely.
It's quite bizarre. So these are genuine figures, and we can back this sort of thing up all day long, every day. So that's the sort of thing we do. We find off-market opportunities. So how can you find RENTVESTOR friendly properties? Well, I think the key thing really is actually to start talking to SUVIDH. SUVIDH's an expert in finance. I love what he does. I love his social media. I know he's passionate about helping his clients. And the first step really is to talk to SUVIDH and his team about what the opportunities are, what your options are. There's no point in actually starting until you actually know what your options are. And so I would be saying, have that conversation, learn about what you can do, and then of course reach out to me, and I will be more than happy to answer questions, help you and guide you around what I think is a really great strategy for building wealth for the long term and creating multiple income streams to produce for your retirement. So SUVIDH, I'm going to open it up to the floor, and please, any questions anyone's got, now's the time to be asking them.
I think we'll start with one that Rupesh has already posted in the chat box.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so he's basically asking, sorry if I missed it earlier. I think the average house price is 600K plus in Melbourne, but the example quoted is 260,000. So obviously that example wasn't for Melbourne. No. How does it work for a 600,000 property with a 50,000 as down payment?
To buy a $600,000 property where?
I think he means in Melbourne. Is that Rupesh?
I'm not really following the basis of the question, Rupesh. What did you mean? Because the basis of what we're talking about, I mean, if you're buying a house in Melbourne for 600,000, you're going to need, for example, depending on whether you qualify, SUVIDH, and I don't want to steal your thunder, even though I was a mortgage broker for 18 years, but you're going to need, I mean, can you get 95% LVR on a $600,000 purchase?
On an investment, no.
No, you get 90, and if you're lucky, you can capitalize the LMI, if you're lucky.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Rupesh, do you want to ask, or do you want to come out and ask the question? Unmute, if I unmute you, you're unmuted, so you're welcome to ask that question, or is there something that's driving the question so I can make sure I understand it properly?
Thanks. Yeah. So my question was with the Melbourne, if I take 600K as a property value, and even if I go with 10% deposit of like 60K, instead of 50K, let's get it as 60K.
Yep.
% I'm presuming, so it help me if I'm going wrong. 50% for investment property, I should be getting with LMI, I should be able to get the property, right?
Yep.
So with those numbers, going back to the 250 or 260 property example that we have seen, I want to correlate to see for a 600K property, how the numbers will play around.
But you're talking about a 600,000 property in Melbourne, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not following the question though, so but I don't understand what the.
Okay. Can we go back to that example which I have shown, like 260K property, where he ended up with $110 as a positive cash flow?
Yes.
So can you help us with the similar example for a 600K property?
Well, that would be really, I mean, I'm not the expert on, I mean, I can work those numbers out, but I'm not sure what a $600,000, what are you trying to achieve?
So let's, I'll help a bit with that if I may. So
Yes,
I
please.
think Rupesh, what you're looking at, I'm assuming if you're looking at a 600,000 property, you're looking at some of the outer suburbs, like in the west you'd be talking about Tani, Truganina, or in the southeast you talk about Cranbourne, Clyde, those kind of suburbs. Is that correct?
Yes, Suvid.
Yeah. So if we're talking about a 600,000 purchase, you'd be looking at from a rental return perspective, if we were to plug in the numbers into that sheet that Phil has, your rental return would be roughly around anywhere from 400 to 440 a week. So that translates to anywhere around 1750 to 1950 a month.
Okay.
Or even if you go on a week-to-week basis, so let's say 440 a week on the upper side. On that sort of loan, 540,000 at the current rates on investment, you're looking at repayments of roughly around the 2,000 to 2,100 mark per month. So you are roughly around $200 per month negative already before even any costs are taken into account.
Okay. Okay.
The rental return, sorry, Rupesh, I didn't really understand your question, brother, so my apologies there. The rental return, the higher the price, of course, or the value of the property, the lower your yield or rental return is. I worked that out, that's a 3.8%. I mean, to me, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've sold a lot of property. I'm a licensed agent. I used to sell a lot of house and land. I mean, to me, it depends on what your strategy is. And I'm not being disrespectful about the strategy. I don't think it's a rentvestor strategy, buying that sort of property. I don't think it works. I'm not saying that it doesn't grow in value, but I think you can be a lot, I think we can be a lot, I think you can be a lot more creative if you're looking for capital growth, good yield, and affordability. You take that $600,000 property, you could potentially almost buy 3 properties in different areas regionally. In fact, I bought a property by way of an example, and SUVIDH, you know about this example previously, where I bought a house recently for one of my clients in Albury for $217,000. It was listed at $225,000, rented at the moment at $285,000. We'll spend between $12,000 to $15,000 on a renovation, so therefore the house owes us $232,000, and we've had it appraised by the local agent who manages 450 properties. They reckon we'll get $310 a week. So if we take that example, $310 a week times 52 weeks and divide it by what it owes us, $232, that'll give us a 6.9% return. So for that $600,000, you've almost bought 3 properties. The other thing with that house that we've bought, it's on an 803 square metre block, and we're actually going to subdivide it and build another house on the back. So this is why I've seen a lot of people go to these seminars, get told, oh, look at these wonderful numbers, oh, and it's negatively geared. I can assure you, a lot of people right now aren't too excited about negative gearing. Negative gearing is going to be one of the things that's going to cause a significant amount of pain when we see over the next 6, particularly maybe the next 12 months, with people's jobs being uncertain. I think you'll find that there's going to be a fair bit of pain to follow around metropolitan Melbourne, particularly in certainly the outer ring suburbs, because a lot of people are very heavily geared. In other words, heavily geared meaning the size of the loan relative to the value of the property.
Okay, got it, Phil. So can we, I mean, sorry, I'm new to this investment properties or anything. So can we, as long as the yield or the cash surplus turns out to be positive, is it a good investment, or should we, that's on one side. Second thing is, when we say the property value, whether we take 600 or 500, so if I understand, we should always go with a lower valued property in a good areas with a proper yield.
Zoom to LA property there, rentvesting. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So it always is about what your goal is. And I think the most important thing, there is not a one size fits all. This is a strategy about building wealth, that about a lot of people, my experience is people no longer want stress financially. So a lot of people have been sold the idea that you've got to buy in metropolitan Melbourne or a capital city for it to work. The thing is, I think the problem with that strategy is too many people are not happy about having to put money in every month, particularly like people's income has got questionable, people are on JobKeeper, people are worried about their own security of their employment. So the idea of having to find extra money in a negatively geared property, and like what SUVIDH said, you've probably got to find at least $200 a month, if not more, whereas this strategy, it's actually putting money in your pocket. So if you bought a lower, more affordable property that's got a high rental yield, over 6%, that's in a strong local economy, everything we do is research. In fact, SUVIDH, I don't know, many of your people are aware I run a podcast called the Philip Robertson Property Podcast. It's on all the major podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, for example. I would be inviting your people, your clients, to actually start listening to that. They will learn a lot and then come back and talk to you about what they can do. And I think that's a really great place. This is just a short session this evening, but that's an opportunity for a lot of people to get a lot of independent knowledge around what's really happening in regional Australia and why it works and makes sense.
That helps a lot, Phil. Thanks a lot.
And Rupesh, I'm always happy to have a chat with you and with SUVIDH offline. No problem. We can make another time and we can help. I mean, we're here to, the goal for SUVIDH and I is to educate people. We want you to be able to make informed decisions. Having been in this space for 20 years, there's enough people running around trying to sell you a property. We're not trying to sell you anything. I as a buyer's advocate, don't have a property to sell. My clients pay me a fee to find them solutions. So, you know, we're always happy to have that conversation. If you're new to this, Rupesh, I say well done to you for being here. And the most important thing is to be open-minded. And that's where the podcast is a really great way for you to get some information and learn more about what this whole space is. But more than happy to talk to you offline.
Sure, Phil. Thanks a lot.
You're most welcome, Rupesh. Any other questions, SUVIDH?
Not in the chat box. Anyone else has any questions?
Hello, everyone, and thanks a lot for this thing. My name is Karan, and
hello, Karan.
actually, I'm a bit more confused. Like, to be very honest, I'm listening to your session since last 2 weeks, like last week and this week, and totally my mindset has been changed.
I'm hoping it's opening up your mindset, Karan.
Yeah. It has changed a lot, to be very honest, thanks to SUVIDH. He brought me in. And I just want to ask you one thing. It's about, like, I just bought a property in Melton South.
Sure.
It's under construction.
Yep.
Like, it's going to start constructing by, I think so, in 6 weeks.
Sure.
So my point is over here is like, it cost me like around 480 something, 480K. And I just paid like 10%.
Yeah.
So I'm not too sure about it's going to be a positive gearing or it's going to be a neutral or negative. I don't know.
Well, I think without seeing the numbers, and that's something that SUVIDH could share with you offline, but I would have thought initially that's going to be a negatively geared property. I think the rent, what would you think the rent would be? $400 a week, $440 a week, SUVIDH, for something like in Melton South?
Or something like what Karan's making, I would say roughly around the 390, 400 sort of mark.
Yeah, I reckon that's a negatively geared property. It seems to me, I mean, it amazes me that how expensive properties have become in Melton South. And with the greatest of respect, Karan, what we would have said is, look, you could diversify and have bought 2 properties in 2 different towns. And again, with the research and knowledge, and perhaps you're only just starting your investment journey. So that's, you know, there's nothing wrong with what you've done, but longer term, and this is where the approach SUVIDH and I take, is we look at where do you want to get to? So, you know, is it over the next 20 years, next 30 years? How much cash do you think you're going to need to live on? Because one of the things we don't think about in Australia very well is we really don't think much about the long term. We're so busy on the treadmill of life, looking after our employment, our kids, our own stresses. Most of us, and I've been guilty of it too, don't think too far down the track. Because the thing about this, and it scared me as well, is at some point we're all going to stop working. There'll be a day when you get your final paycheck. And whatever you've accumulated in superannuation and in making informed decisions over your working life has got to last you until you leave this earth. And I don't know about all of you, I'm a father of two boys. I've got a 20-year-old son and a boy in year 12 and 18-year-old. And I want to leave a legacy for my kids. And the way I've done this is I had a beautiful home in Kew and a beach house in Blairgowrie. I lost those homes. When I say I lost them, they were sold as a result of my divorce. And so for me, it was like, gosh, I got to 52 years of age and it was like, I actually don't have much super, and it made me quite nervous. And so this strategy is one. I'm a rentvestor. I live in Canterbury, which is a nice suburb in Melbourne, and I buy properties regionally myself. And my plan, which I'm happy to share with you, is I buy them in an investment trust. Again, always get your own advice. And my plan is not to sell. So I won't trigger a capital gains event. I'll pass them on to my boys, but they will be one of my income streams for my retirement. And I say this to people, you know, you can go about having the beautiful home, and that's a good thing. I like houses myself. But you can't, when you get to retirement, sell the lounge room. You can't sell the rumpus room when you need cash. And as silly and simplistic as that is, we all need cash to live on, don't we? If you want to have a holiday, people talk about it being your golden years in retirement. But you know what? Most people, unfortunately, the truth of it is, in this country, most people will end up dead, broke, or dead. We all die at some point, but most people won't have much money purely because they didn't pay attention, they didn't invest the time. And things like tonight, I have a great respect for SUVIDH. Why? Because he cares enough about his customers, who he treats as his family, and he thinks, you know what, I need to be educating my customers about opportunities. And so I always think, you know, a gentleman like SUVIDH is doing a great service to his community. So, you know, that's why we're always happy to run these. We're happy to take calls offline and educate you as best we can, so you make intelligent decisions. Because I can assure you of one thing, there's plenty of people that want to sell you a property, and plenty of the properties don't work. It might look great. I've also got I've got an ebook as well, SUVIDH, that you might know about, called Before You Spend Your Dough Is What You Need to Know. And it's my journey of 20 years as both a mortgage broker and a property consultant, learning the pitfalls and the questions to ask. Remember, always ask this question. When you're looking at buying any sort of property, ask the question, who is selling the property and who is paying them? How are they getting paid? So if it's a real estate agent, they're only going to show you what owe you. In other words, you might have bought that one in Melton South, but there might be something better elsewhere, but the person selling it to you is not going to tell you. So it's a bit like Henry Ford once said, you can have any colour you want, when he was bringing out the Model T Ford, but you can have any colour you want as long as it's black. And so the point is, ask the question, where's the money coming from that's being paid for the person selling you the property? It's just, you know, a bit of an insurance. Always start to doubt, you know, what's their motivation? Why are they telling you this area is so good? Research is the key. SUVIDH, any more questions?
It's open to the floor if anyone wants to ask any. I don't see any in the chat box. Anyone, any questions?
You know, as always, SUVIDH, clients can come back to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
They can get in touch with me. I'm easy to find. I really encourage people just to start learning about this opportunity. I think it's really exciting. I'm having a ball. I'm so excited. I love looking after our clients. People just can't believe what we're able to achieve for them when we buy properties. We renovate them. We run all the numbers. Our clients actually speak to our property assessors. My company buys property across Australia. Even though, like you, most of you, I'm stuck here in Melbourne, I've got people on the ground working for me across Australia. They're property assessors, and they're typically either a pest and building inspector, so they actually are typically building background, or a chippy, or in other words, a carpenter. And those that follow me on LinkedIn, if you don't, please connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll see my posts. SUVIDH would have seen the recent one I talked about, called it the John West syndrome. And that's like the fish that John West reject. It's not unusual. We might look at half a dozen properties and reject the first 4 because of different reasons, that they didn't stack up or that they were going to take too much work. and it would be overcapitalising. So as always, SUVIDH, thank you for your time. Thank you for everybody to make time in their schedules. I think it's hopefully the numbers are coming down and that we'll be out of lockdown soon. And guess what? Here's the thing. And again, it was reinforced today on the radio. People are going to be excited. It's like wanting to go to cafes and restaurants again. There is a bunch of people just waiting in the wings to get out and start buying regional property. If you wanted a sign, now's the time to get out and buy, because there's not much stock around. And what that means is that's going to force prices up. So it's certainly a really competitive time in the marketplace. And in fact, I myself, I don't mind telling you, SUVIDH, you would have seen this with first home buyers at the moment. It's a perfect storm. They've got up to $40,000 in government grants. There's no lender's mortgage insurance with the federal government initiative. They're our biggest competition in the marketplace for us in regional Australia at the moment.
Yep.
So that's it, folks. I don't think there's anything else that we need to cover off. Like I said, as always, if you've got any questions, please direct them to SUVIDH, my podcast, the Philip Robertson Property Podcast. I encourage you to watch that. To listen to it rather. Watch it, that's interesting. To listen to it, it's a great source of knowledge for you as you build your knowledge to become good investors over time. SUVIDH, thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, and thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you. Thanks, Philip and SUVIDH.
Thanks. You. Have a great evening. I'll say good night.
SUVIDH.
Thank you, everyone. Take care and bye for now.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, SUVIDH.
Cheers,
Bye.
guys.